Hey everybody, welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we are going to be talking to Julie M. Simon about this book, When Food is Comfort. Nurture yourself mindfully, rewire your brain, and end emotional eating. So welcome to the show.
Hi there, CJ. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, I've been on the special diet here in Seattle. We have this gentleman. Now I'm going to totally forget his name. It's called Arival, and it's by the guy who headed up Genentech, which looks at genetic data. And so they look at your genetic data, they look at your eating habits, they look at your workout. And so I'm almost concluding one full year of this program.
Aha.
And part of this program, I'm at the point where I've been recording my calories into an app. And I said to my coach, who I love, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And she said, well, great, we'll get you to mindful eating. And so this could not be more perfectly timed for me because I completely relate to this whole idea of mindful eating, only to the extent that it's very hard and I didn't know exactly how to do it. So your book just came just in time to provide me with the prescription I needed to figure out how to mindfully eat. So thank you. It's
You're
great.
welcome.
Savior. So I was talking to a dear friend of mine who's also on the diet path, and I said, this book just opened my eyes that our eating issues could be related to our childhood. So tell us a little bit about that, because that was shocking for me when I first read it. My jaw literally dropped on the ground and like, oh, that makes sense. But tell us, for folks that haven't read your book yet, what that means.
Well, it's exciting information that's come out in the last 20 years. Neuroscientific studies have uncovered that our early social and emotional environments play a very big role in eating challenges, right? So the quality of the care, the quality of the nurturance we receive when we're young plays a role in how our brains get wired.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't get sufficient and consistent emotional nurturance when we're young, our brain and our nervous system get wired for high arousal.
Mm-hmm.
And that leaves us at risk for turning to external sources of comfort like food and drugs and alcohol. And we now know that, this kind of brain wiring underlies almost all addictions and wayward behaviors, that we have trouble controlling.
Mm-hmm.
Because when our brain gets wired for high arousal, the self-regulation circuits of our brain don't connect properly to the what you'll call the emotional brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have difficulty when we're under stress, when we're tired. We have difficulty accessing the part of our brain that would calm and soothe us and help us regulate our behaviors, not turn to food for comfort.
Mm-hmm. So it's basically, you talk about an environment we're wired for higher arousal. For folks who aren't really familiar with what that means, it sounds somewhat sexual. I don't think it is. But what does it mean that you're wired for higher arousal?
It basically means that you easily feel upset, agitated, things that maybe another person might, be able to kind of calmly handle. You find that you get stressed out easy. That's probably a better way to put it. You find that you're easily stressed out, you're easily overwhelmed, and it's harder for you to regulate your behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So most people who are emotional eaters will tell you that they find themselves eating when they're under stress, eating when they're tense, eating when they're nervous. Some will say they're eating when they're sad and depressed. Their brains are wired a little differently than someone who received consistent and sufficient emotional nurturance during those early years. So they're having trouble regulating their nervous system and having trouble regulating their moods.
Mm. Don't you feel like that's everyone? Who doesn't have an emotional eating problem? I mean, really, who doesn't have an emotional? I mean, perhaps you had like this perfect parent that I've only seen during Buddhist meditations when you imagine your perfect parent that says the right thing, that loves you in the right way. Doesn't everyone in some form have this self-regulatory problem, or are we just talking, are some of your patients the extreme? It seems like everyone has some of this.
I think everybody does have some of this because parenting is a difficult job and no parent can, be perfect. And today, as opposed to 50, 70 years ago, we don't have villages raising children anymore. We have single parents.
Or the internet.
Or the internet. We have the internet. We have single parents. We have latchkey kids, so kids are missing out on, a level of nurturance that they would have been able to get, from a village, from a large community of elders around them. So yes, I mean, everybody, I think we all eat emotionally. Really, the question is it a problem for you? We all turn to food a little bit for pleasure, for sure, excitement, right. Celebration. We all turn to food a little bit, maybe when we're stressed out or when we're struggling. Question is, do you do it so often that your health is at risk or that you're gaining weight? Mm-hmm. If you're doing it often enough, you're going to probably be coming to see me, because you're going to feel like I'm having health challenges, right. Or my weight is skyrocketing, right? So then we know something's going on, because when you say, doesn't everybody eat emotionally? Well, some people, had parents who did a good enough job. And let me make a disclaimer here that I'm never about blaming parents, because parenting is the hardest job in the world.
It is, absolutely.
So it's really not about finding fault with parents. It's really about looking at what self-care skills you might have missed out on learning early in your life because either your parents didn't have the skills themselves or because they were too distracted or struggling with their own things that they couldn't teach you those skills. And your brain got wired in a particular way that's making it difficult for you to regulate your behavior. So We're not trying to blame parents. We're really just trying to look at what happened, even if your parents are loving. I have a chapter in the book that says, yes, but I had great parents.
Right.
Because people often come to me and they say, how could it be my childhood? I had really loving, kind, supportive, nurturing parents. Well, you know what? Even kind, nurturing parents sometimes don't know how to handle their children's emotional challenges. So a kid comes home from school, a little girl says, all the other girls wouldn't sit with me and I had to sit alone at the lunch table. And the mother says, I'm so sorry that happened. Let's go out and get an ice cream. Right? Yep. So the mother is very loving and kind, but she doesn't know what to do with her daughter's emotions, doesn't know how to process them. Maybe she's never learned how to process her own. And now what she's modeling for her child is, when you have really big feelings like that, we go get something to eat. Right? So the child is not learning how to move through these states and learn from her emotions, because emotions are just precious signals from within, here to teach us quite a bit.
Well, sadly, I read your chapter and now know why the first couple of chapters, I'm like, well, of course I'm an emotional eater. I read through here and I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to get all these things, so I would love your help. It was your parents really don't listen to you have some type of emotional response, and they ignore you or pretend you're not there, which is actually my mom's parenting style. I literally saw her babysit my kids, and the kids would cry. She's like, just pretend that they're not there, and they will eventually stop. And I was like, okay, well, now wonder why I'm so screwed up. but I didn't realize that it was related to emotional eating too. So are you listened and heard? Are your emotions validated? Do you even exist, in the world of your parents, and are your emotions validated? Were you attached to your parents and given the proper love and nurturance and kind of supportive, warm environment? I can't remember all of them, but can you tell me about the kind of skills an idealized parent, and I mention it as an idealized parent because, as you say, it's very rare to find someone who encapsulates perhaps all of these ideal forms of parenting. But what are the forms of parenting skills that relate to this emotional eating?
Well, the good news for parents is that you don't have to be perfect,
Right.
right? It's not about perfection. You really just have to do a good enough job at some of the skills that we're talking about. So the main one that we're talking about is called attunement.
Mm-hmm.
And attunement just means you're tuning in, right? So you're tuning in to your child's world. So if you think of an infant or a small child, when the infant has emotions, the infant doesn't have labels yet. The infant doesn't say, I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm tired. The infant just cries,
Right.
okay? And with no labels, the emotions are presenting in the infant's body as bodily sensations. And mommy swoops in, and mommy or daddy or grandma, whoever, mommy's job is to regulate the child's emotional system and calm down the child's nervous system. So
Mm.
when we're an infant, we can't do any of that for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the mommy swoops in, and with her tone and her touch and her words, she regulates our emotions and she regulates our nervous system. Now, as we become a toddler, we start to have labels. Mommy's going to help us label some of those emotions. Whoa, you're having really big feelings. It looks like you're feeling sad. It looks like
Mm-hmm.
you're really angry today. And we're going to still depend on mommy to regulate our emotions, but
Mm.
she's going to now co-regulate with us. So we're going to be starting to learn how to regulate. And how do we learn that? Mommy tunes into our emotions. She validates them. So she says it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to
Mm-hmm.
have those feelings.
Mm.
She tunes into them. She notices the sensations we're having. Wow, it looks like your head is hurting. You're putting your hands on your head. It looks like
Mm.
your tummy it has some butterflies in it, huh,
Right.
today. That's
Yeah.
when you're scared,
Yeah.
right? So mommy's helping us label, she's helping us identify bodily sensations with her tone, with her words, with her behavior. She's soothing and comforting us and regulating us. Over time, when we have enough of this, thousands and thousands and thousands of these interactions with mommy, not only is our brain forming circuitry between the top upstairs of the brain where the cortex is and the self-regulation and self-soothing circuitry is, we're forming circuits between that and where the emotional brain, the primitive brain is. And we're
Mm.
laying down those tracks by the attunement. So the attunement from mommy
Mm.
or whoever is critical for the development of the structure, those integrative circuits between those parts, and the chemistry of the brain. So we're also laying down the structures that produce dopamine and serotonin, all the feel-good chemicals. They require attunement for all those structures to get laid down. Then we also have our stress apparatus, our immune response and our adrenal glands that kick out stress hormones. All of that is getting developed around this attunement.
I see.
So,
Okay, got it.
so you can see how critical a parent's um, skills are to a developing infant and to the brain. Puts a lot of pressure on caregivers,
Right.
to have had their own needs met and have developed those skills. And so many caregivers have never developed those skills. And there we have addiction, right?
Right.
But so attunement is the critical skill that we need a parent to be capable of. And via attunement, we form a secure attachment to our caregiver. And that
Uh,
attachment is a foundation for a lot of comfort and soothing. And again, wiring in those structures in the brain.
and then what happens when we have the secure attachment to that caregiver? What happens to our brain? Because you were talking about when we don't actually have our own regulatory systems, it affects both our emotions. It also affects our and all the hormonal pieces that are part of that. And then you also said that it affects our stress levels. So similarly, if we don't have attachment, what happens?
Well, all that wiring is not getting wired in properly.
Okay, so
And
all the
so
wiring you just talked about
all the
also.
wiring I just talked about gets wired in properly when we have good attunement.
And attach.
And when
Okay.
we have good attunement, we form a secure attachment, right?
Okay, got it.
And and even parts of the brain that record memory, right, are working properly so that we have memories of our earliest
Mm,
times. right? And
Mm.
so when there's too much stress, when we're not getting the good attunement, but maybe we're getting neglect or maybe even abuse or just a stressed out parent, maybe a distracted, anxious, stressed out parent that we see that in our mommy's face all the time, that rather than her
Mhm.
being calm and loving and soothing, she always looks stressed out and anxious and worried. Our brain structures are forming, and so we may not even be properly forming the parts of the structures of the brain that form those memories. So what does that look like down the road? People say to me, I can't remember a thing about my childhood, like
Mm.
I just don't have any memory. So we didn't lay them down,
Mm.
and or we laid them down but we can't retrieve them.
Mm.
So
Mm.
the brain is really being formed during those early years. Critical structures are being formed in the brain during those early years, and attunement is the key.
Mm. Well, here's the good news. You can build this inner nurture yourself. And this is what I love about this book. Because the other thing I was thinking, I've read, I don't know if it's the right person, is it Aldecott, the one who looks at holding? Um,
Winnicott.
Winnicott, that's what it is. Winnicott, which actually looks at a holding environment, and it talks about
Yes.
attachment parenting. And if and I read about Winnicott in the book of the Enneagram because they were talking about spiritual holding. And so if you don't have the spiritual holding or the emotional holding, whichever, holding period by someone who's a nurturing, supporting person, it actually affects your spiritual development. It affects everything.
Everything.
And I read this book and I underlined it and said, I don't have this. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do to get it? Because there are not a lot of books out there that talk about, well, then how do you develop it? And in fact, there are things like in Buddhism, they have this perfect parenting meditation where you kind of imagine your perfect parent and you imagine them like showering love and being there for you. But it's very like hypothetical. It's like you're kind of imagining it and I think building in the circuitry that you're talking about and wiring that perfect person in you, but it's not on demand when you need it. Right. So when you don't get the raise, when, your girlfriend or boyfriend breaks up with you, when you've had a hard day at work, you don't usually think, oh, I'm going to bring the perfect parenting meditation up to help me. It's just one of those things that it goes unattended. And what I love about your book is it literally provides a prescriptive protocol for you to go through when this happens. So I was wondering if we can step through some of the things I actually see in my book. Look at my book. I've highlighted this because here's what I've been thinking is I'm like, well, I know I have this issue. So I might as well just do this preemptively in the morning because it's what I've noticed is, okay, when I've been mindful about my eating, because I'm generally like, basically conquering different parts of my life. So I've been mindful with my work interactions. I've been mindful with my interactions with my kids. And now I'm being mindful about eating. And what I realize is that I'm like, I'm not hungry. I've been working with my nutritionist and coach to create a scale of 1 to 10. 1, which is like I'm starving hungry, 2, and then 3 and 4, which is like the time when you should eat. And then 10 is like I'm ready to throw up, ate too much. Like I think 9 or 8, it's like my belly, I have to unhook the button on my pants because so you're trying to get at that 6 or 7, 3 or 4 level. And what was interesting is I noticed that I waited way too long in this thing, which I think is probably as a result of being kind of a kid that learned how to live with deprivation and scarcity. It just was my normal state of being. So I coded a 3 or 4 on hunger where it was really a 1 or 2, like I was desperate for hunger, like to eat, when it was really a 3 or 4, like I didn't even know. And now I've been literally, I eat every 3 hours. I started eating every 3 hours. I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to be hungry. I mean, it sounds really crazy, but I honestly had no idea what it felt like to be not starving, but just hungry in a controllable fashion. So I kind of built that piece. And
That's
now
such an important piece.
it
That's a
is,
really important piece. In my first book
yeah.
and also in my 12-week program, we spend time. I have one full chapter
Mm,
in my first book, The Emotional Eater's Repair Manual, on practice eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full, and teaching people about the levels of hunger, that ravenous is when we
right.
don't want to be starting to eat, and also about the stretch sensation, that the very first sensation of fullness is just a little subtle sensation. You know, if you're being mindful, you'll really start to notice the little first feeling when your body's signaling you
Mm,
that it's had enough. Your body is so incredibly wise. It's making all those calculations behind the scenes, and it gives you signals, the first light stretch sensation, then it gives you a louder fullness signal, and you go, oh, I'm full. And then if you bypass that, you get to what you said before,
yeah,
you
like I
know,
feel like a little bit like I could throw up from eating too much. No, that's got
yeah,
that wafer thin thing then from the Monty Python episode. But what I realize is that there are times when I'm just standing, I'm like, I'm here, ready to eat, and I tune in, I'm like, am I hungry? I'm not hungry. I'm just standing here and I'm not hungry. But at that point, it's really hard to kind of turn around because you suggest like 10 minutes, just take 10 minutes before you start eating and go through these protocols. It's very hard to do that. So I'm wondering, could you preemptively do that in the morning to just like, what is your emotional stuff? Get it out there so that you don't so you're preempting these emotional eating habits, or does it have to be timed around the time when you're about to go grab those
no, it
Doritos?
certainly doesn't have to be just when you're about to grab. But we, before we go into those skills, I want to say
Yeah.
one other thing, that when we talked about the attunement that we get from the mommy, and we're building the circuitry of the brain, the structures and the circuitry of the brain, when mommy has a soothing, calming, supportive, comforting, validating, empathic, warm voice, okay, we're actually building that voice in our own head, right? So
Mm,
if you think about all the voices that you have in your head, you think about a voice that said, you did a terrible job, that was awful, you look terrible, you know,
right.
or you have a voice that said, you rock, you did such a good job, I'm so proud of you, of course you're feeling that way, it makes sense. What do the voices in your head sound like? When we get that good attunement and loving and nourishing attachment, we begin to form an inner supportive voice, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what this book is so much about, is that if you didn't develop that supportive inner voice, that is most likely a good part of the reason why you turn to food,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know how to soothe and calm yourself. So
Right.
how are you going to do that? Now, you talked about this meditation, right? But are you really going to do a guided imagery meditation, you know, every time during the, you know, the 5 times during the day
No,
that you're
you're not.
stressed out? And, you know, that's not realistic. And I don't think a meditation like that, because it's not practiced enough, I don't think it's wiring in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what we want to do is we want to do something consistent. We want to practice a skill consistently. Just like I always use the example of if you're playing the guitar, right? If you practice and practice and practice playing the guitar consistently, putting your fingers on the frets, strumming, all of a sudden it just flows. It just
Mm-hmm.
happens. It gets wired in somehow into kind of procedural memory, uh, and you're able to do it. We want to do the same thing with this inner nurturing voice. We want to wire it in so that, just like an infant, when an infant is in distress and all of a sudden the infant sees mommy's face, the infant calms down. If mommy is nurturing and soothing, the infant immediately begins to calm down when she or he sees mommy's face. What you want to do is wire in a voice that is so soothing and so comforting that the minute you're under stress, the voice goes on overdrive, right? The
Mm-hmm.
voice begins to calm and soothe and comfort, and you can regulate your emotional system, regulate your nervous system, and then you can make wise choices and decisions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this 7 skill practice is designed for you to first soothe and calm your nervous system and your emotional states,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And then get to problem solving and meeting your needs and setting limits with yourself on wayward behaviors. So to answer your question, do you need to do it only when you're about to grab food? No, you can practice this, but it would be a good thing to practice whenever you're stressed, whenever you're in any kind of distress. It doesn't have to be big distress. It could be mild distress, right? Anything that's bothering you is a good time to practice, right? Anything going on in your life that you maybe not something that's so big, that you're really emotionally agitated over, but just maybe you take something in your life that's upsetting you and you say, okay, I'm gonna run myself through these skills on this. It doesn't have to be something I'm turning to food for. And then, of course, practice it when you want to turn to food. So you can practice it all the time. The very first skill is called pop the hood. All right. So when let's just use an example where you've had a little bit of stress and you're driving home from work and you're thinking about what you're going to eat.
Right.
And you know that you'd really like to order a salad somewhere, eat healthy, but what you really want to do is go get, a bacon burger and fries, right? You think to yourself, I shouldn't have that. I've been having too much of that kind of food lately. It's not healthy for my body. It's not really on my eating plan, but it's really what I want. The youngest part of you, what I call the feeling self, is saying it's really what I want. Okay.
Yep.
I always ask people to not to start by saying I can't have that and create restriction and deprivation. Rather than do that, pull away. If you're going to a drive-through or a restaurant, maybe sit in your car. This is where the 10-minute pause comes in. Pull away from doing that.
Right.
Okay? And give yourself permission that after you do this, run yourself through the skills, you can go have it. Because over time, initially the skills aren't going to stop all your wayward behavior right away. They have to be built, and at first they're going to feel awkward. But over time, they will stop your behavior.
And just out of curiosity, how long does it usually take before you can build the internal wiring yourself? I mean, you've been, so in my case, for 55 years, I've been doing it this other way. This inner parent is kind of critical and kind of like, really? You're going to eat that? Like, I thought you were on a diet. Oh, my God. We're going to be sorry. All those kind of things kind of come up versus my inner nurturer. So how long until you rewire that programming?
I think, in order to answer that question, I would have to ask anyone, because I get asked that question all the time, and I would have to ask anyone, how much are you willing to practice? Because I have always said to people, I can get you exactly where you want to go if you're going to do what I tell you to do, right? You've got to practice all the time. So as an example, when I was first doing these kind of skills, I caught at least two self-defeating, critical, judgmental, shaming thoughts every day for a year and reframed them with something that was calming, soothing, energizing, positive. I was willing to do that every single day for a year. Okay. Now, by doing that every single day, at the end of the year, I was absolutely a new person. I was amazed. And I like to kind of think of it as changing your vibration, right? So quantum physics tells us, that we're not solids. We're actually just pulsating energy, right? And so when all your thoughts are tight and negative and critical and judgmental and shaming, you're pulsating, you're vibrating kind of a particular frequency that, let's just call it a tight frequency, okay? When you start to have in your head thoughts that are kind and loving and unconditionally accepting and soothing and comforting, you vibrate at a different frequency. We all know this to be true, right? So by the time I did that for a year, I just was vibrating at a different frequency, moving through my life, and everything started to change. And that's just an example of one of the pieces of the work that I did, one of the skills, which is in the book called Catch and Reframe. So is it going to happen in a couple of months? No, probably not, unless you already are kind of halfway there, been working on these skills without even knowing it, or you have a lot of them developed already anyway. If you don't, I wouldn't worry as much as how long it takes. I would just get started. I would just say you don't really have too much choice in the matter, because you're either going to stay stuck in the place that you're stuck in that you don't like, or you're going to start to move in the direction of healing and transformation, right? So It's not a quick fix. Inner nurturing is what my book is all about. And I say it's not a quick fix, but it's a forever fix.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it does take time.
So you did this for a year, and you were talking about one of the steps. I assume that you were on this journey and you're doing all these steps, these 7
Yes.
skills over time. How did your life change? It wasn't just about the eating, right? I mean, you said you were vibrating at a higher level. So my understanding about vibration is that you're just happier. You're living in a happier place. Did it affect more than just your food?
Everything. It affected everything. It was absolutely amazing because I was slowly piecing together these skills that I was missing from childhood, and I was slowly practicing them. And I didn't know back then about the neuroscience. I didn't know that I was actually rewiring my brain. I didn't find out until later when I understood the
Mm,
neuroscience what I had actually done for myself. But all aspects of my life were changing. First of all, my mood was improving regularly. Okay. My relationships were getting better. I was kind of cluttery at the time. And so as my internal chaos was clearing out, my external clutter was clearing out.
mm,
I was kinder to myself all the time. I was much more kind to others. My judgment of myself often translated into judging other people. I found myself much more compassionate towards other people in my life, much
mm,
less judgmental. My health was better. My sleep was better. It was easier for me to exercise regularly. Instead of having to use a drill sergeant to get myself to exercise all the time, my inner nurture was a better motivator. So
mm.
when I didn't want to get up and exercise in the morning and my feeling self would say, I'm too tired, I'm too hungry, I'm too this, I'm too that, my inner nurture would say, hey, sweetie, I really get it. I really understand that you're tired. You haven't been getting a lot of sleep lately. But you know what? We always feel so much better when we do this. Let's just go out and try for 10 minutes. And if we hate it and we don't want to do it, then we can turn around. All of a sudden, there was a kind, loving voice motivating me to move through life. And she
Mm.
became my best friend. She was always there. There was a morning where I woke up. It was such a turning point for me. I'll never forget, where I woke up one morning and I heard this voice say, I love you, Julie. And I
No,
thought,
that's nice.
no, who said that? Where did that come
That's
from? Right?
sweet.
I was developing self-love and I hadn't had self-love until
Mm,
then. I
mm,
couldn't have, if you asked me back then, did I love myself? I wouldn't have said yes.
I love it. Well, and what I love about having it tied to food, because again, I do think that we're all emotional eaters, is that you can actually tie it to something that happens, more than probably 3 times during a day, because there's all those snacking, grazing periods in between, or grabbing lattes or whatever in between. So I thought we would actually walk through these 7 steps. I know it's going to be hard because there's a lot of steps in here, but the first one. So I'm going to actually use an example. I think a lot of us may. I'll use one of my own personal examples, and we can kind of step through this. I haven't actually gone through this list, but let's try it. So I find. I never really had desserts ever, because as an Asian, you don't really have the notion of desserts. That's not part of your regular thing. But then suddenly, when I had a family, we started having desserts all the time. So I never had desserts. But now I'm kind of like, after dinner, time for dessert. So I'm looking for something sweet, where, as if, like I said, I never had that as a kid. Okay, so now it's after dinner. I'm looking for a dessert or something sweet. And I know that this is probably an emotional thing, because I'm full from my meal. I tune in, and I'm actually full at, let's ideally say, 6 or 7. I know what a 6 or 7 is. I'm full, but yet I have this desire to go eat dessert, or popcorn at like whatever it is that is driving one. So then I would look at this table one, pop the hood, and tune into the emotions that I may be feeling. And so I feel like, well, it's the end of the day. It's time to it's I feel kind of a happy, like, time to I guess, let's see. Um, I'm feeling kind of like, okay, it's time to kind of celebrate, right? Even though there's I'm not even sure what I've done during the day. Sometimes there's nothing I've done during the day that I would feel willing to celebrate. But okay, I'll actually do today. So I actually have this one article that I'm trying to finish. I feel a little bit pressure about that. So I would say I'm excited about this article, but I'm distressed because I don't know exactly when I'm going to be able to get this article in, given the rest of my day and the timing for the rest of the week. I'm going on a business trip, so I'm a little bit distressed. I'm I'm disappointed that I may not be able to do this because I really do want to get this article done, and I feel a little bit uh, kind of chagrined that I will not be doing it. So I'm looking at your 7 core emotions, which are happy, afraid, hurt, ashamed, guilt, sad, and anger, and all the different variations related to that. So those are the ones. So let's just take that as a simple description because I could probably go in my whole pathetic life story and bore us all. But let's just say I'm going to dessert. I feel a little bit stressed because I have this article due. And I feel like, well, I want to have a little bit of, I want to have like a piece of cake, let's say, or
Okay.
something that I
And
know is
so,
like not good for me.
so what in skill number 1, pop the hood, what we're working on is identifying what our emotions are.
Right.
We also identify what our bodily sensations are, and
Okay.
we can do that in either order. So some people have trouble figuring out what their emotions are, but they can identify their bodily sensations easier. So
Right.
someone might like have what you're feeling and say, I'm not really sure what I'm feeling, but I'm noticing some tension in my shoulders.
Right.
What would you say are the bodily sensations that you're noticing?
I would say tense, a little bit of uh, kind of tense. Not let's see, not my head's not moving around. Kind of tense, and
What does the anxiety feel like?
I'm looking. Should I be using your words or trying to use a different set of different
Just
words? Okay, all right. So I
just
would
close
say
your eyes for a second and see what your body is feeling while you're worried about getting this article
it's
done.
kind of feels like a churning, like a churning feeling,
Where?
and around my throat and in my stomach area. There's this kind of come on, like this kind of anxious churning feeling, and a sense of not breathing fully, so kind of suffocating.
Uh-huh.
Is that
Right.
enough? We don't have to do the
Yes.
whole thing, but let's say that I'm suffocating, I'm tense, I'm trying to celebrate because I did actually got really great feedback from this article, and I want to finish the final draft so we can send it to get published. So I'm feeling happy about that, but at the same time, I'm feeling a little bit distressed and a little bit chagrined that I may not get it before I go on, and disappointed that I may not get it done before I leave on vacation on Thursday.
Okay. And so what I want to highlight is that, we talked about the external attunement that we would get from our mommy when we're little, when we're having these feelings.
Yeah.
What we're doing with Pop the Hood is we're practicing internal
Mm-hmm.
attunement. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so because we said our brains didn't get wired from the attunement that we needed when we were young, now we can rewire our brains
Mm.
by practicing internal attunement. So that's what you've just done. You've internally attuned to yourself, and
I see. Okay, got it. Yep,
you've
got it.
identified your emotions, and you've identified your bodily sensations. And just by the very act of doing that, first of all, you're beginning to sculpt your brain connections, sculpt the circuitry. Okay. So that's why it's so important to stop, slow down, pop the hood, and just like a master mechanic who pops the hood on the car, you're popping the hood and you're figuring out what is going on underneath the hood.
Right.
Okay. What's going on in there? I'm having all these emotions and I'm having all these bodily sensations. And oftentimes just the act of doing that starts to feel a little bit better, right?
Right.
We start
Because you
because
actually are noticing it.
you're noticing and you're slowing down a little bit. Okay.
Right. Wait, so this is equivalent, and I'm kind of rewinding back to when you said, when your mom says, "Oh, honey, it looks like you've actually look a little bit like looks like you got some butterflies in your stomach, or, you don't look like your normal self, or what's happening?" Like your mom even notices that you actually have something going on, and then she labels it for you. This is kind of the equivalent internal attunement that you're talking about.
Exactly,
Okay.
because isn't it true that when you see anybody in your world, whether it's your husband or your child, you can see in someone, you can see tension, you can see calm, you can see terror, right? I was watching something about the fires in California, and this one woman who her and her husband were flown out in a helicopter, she said Her husband looked at her when they were going to before they were getting in the helicopter, and he said, "It's all going to be okay." But she could see complete terror in his face,
Right.
right? So, we read it doesn't matter that his words said we're going to be
Yes.
okay. All she read by his body language was
Yeah, it's
terror.
like, we're going to be okay. Yeah, I
Right.
don't believe you.
Right. So, when your mom says to you, "I'm not angry,"
Right.
you know, right? I mean, we're busy reading all this
Right.
stuff. So we pop the hood, we practice internal attunement, we begin the process of sculpting those brain pathways that didn't get connected and integrated long ago. Okay. And now in skill number 2, we're going to begin, and we can even begin this in skill number 1 if we choose to. We're going to start to build and strengthen that inner nurturing voice. And that's an adult voice. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so even in Pop the Hood, skill number 1, we can ask ourselves, we can ask that young part of us, what are you feeling right now?
Right.
What bodily sensations are you having? So we can start to get practice with that voice, separating out those voices. And often in my practice, for example, I'll have people, and you can do this too out there at home, I'll have people hold a stuffed animal.
Oh, okay, got it.
And do their Pop the Hood with the stuffed animal. So they'll
Right.
say to the bunny rabbit they're holding, "I'm wondering what you're feeling right now."
Oh.
Right? And it helps them get some separation between the voices. Okay.
Yes.
So there's that very young part of you that's saying, I'm feeling disappointed, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling excited about writing the article, I'm feeling worried. And then there's another part of you, the comforter, the soother, that can address that.
Right. So there's the feeling self, which is probably a younger version of myself that never really got that when I was younger. So that's why
Yes.
it's kind of stuck in this kind of like, like that kind of thing.
Right. And the feeling self is even the part of you that's a happy adult, that's excited and excited about writing the article. That's
Right.
still that your feeling self. So
Right.
your feeling self can be very young, or your feeling self can be an older you that's
Right.
feeling. But
Right.
it's the part of you that feels. It's not the part of you that's busy thinking and
Okay.
solving.
And then skill 2, is that your adult self that then does as suggested in providing self-validation? Is that your adult self?
Yes. And skill number 2 is to practice self-validation. And this is where we begin our work on developing the inner nurturing voice, really developing the inner nurturing voice. So this is where that voice, that inner nurture part of you, is going to say things like, it makes sense to feel the way you're feeling, and I can understand. So we practice acceptance of all of our emotions and bodily sensations, and we practice understanding of those. So, and those are really 2 separate things. So that
Right.
means it's okay to feel excited about getting an article out and worried that you might not get it out. And it's also acceptable, it's understandable to have those feelings. So for many of us, we never really got this kind of validation when we were young. Maybe we got it a little bit, maybe we never got it. We had someone tell us, I know for me, my mother, if I ever told her any emotion, she'd say, "Look, Julie," and then I knew the lecture was coming.
Right.
She wouldn't say, "Of course you're feeling that way. It makes sense that you're feeling that way." I didn't get that validation. And so, I would quickly invalidate myself when I would
Right.
have feelings.
Right.
So step number 2, we're practicing the developmentally critical experience of validation. So we're practicing that, and at the same time, we're building and strengthening the voice that provides it. Okay.
We're building our internal nurture, that voice. And so there's a whole litany of these things. And just reading these things out, when I was reading them, I'm like, I feel calmer. It's okay to be upset. It's all right to have those feelings. All these emotions are valid. It's okay to show your emotions. All these kinds of things that very few parents I usually see running around saying these things. Or, it makes sense that you feel this way. I can see how you feel that. I hear you. That is shocking. Of course you're feeling numb. Like, whatever it is, providing, like, I understand and it's okay. That's the adult. And I love that. Just these 2 pages alone are valuable to just kind of build it over and over and over and over to be like, it's okay, CJ. Of course you're going to be upset because, you really want this article. I've been writing. It's the very first time I'm writing, and it makes sense that I'm both excited and nervous, and I don't have enough time, but well, but what's interesting that you said earlier on is until I actually have this conversation, right, with myself. If I'm like, so let's go into problem solving. So why don't you clear out your schedule? Blah, 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 blah. It's until this part is really heard, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice to kind of fast forward to the next step.
Right. You're not really honoring all the stuff that's coming up for you, all the emotions that are coming up. Rather, it doesn't take a lot of time to pop the hood. And if you honor all the emotions that are coming up, you're actually regulating your nervous system. So if you bypass pop the hood and you just say, okay, come on, let's get going. Let's sit down and we'll write the article. You haven't really given yourself a chance to regulate your nervous system before you write. You're more apt to write better and be able to complete the tasks that you want to complete if you're approaching them more calmly. Right. Than if you're all over the map inside of yourself.
Right. If you have your inner nurturer, like, it's okay, it's going to be all right, you'll get the article done, it always gets done, that kind of stuff.
And by the way, I have to tell you that one of the reasons why I give those lists in many places of the book, how to soothe yourself, how to talk to yourself, is because over the nearly 30 years I've been doing what I do, running groups and working with, private clients, I've seen that they don't have this language.
They don't.
They never learned this language. And so they hear me say it, but it's not enough one time a week to hear someone say it. So I wanted to put it in writing so this is what the language of compassion looks like. This is what it looks like when you're validated by another person.
Yeah, it's huge.
Right?
It's hugely valuable. Okay, then the next step 3 is reinforce the alliance. So inform your feeling self that your inner nurturer is on the scene and ready to help, right? It's like, I'm here. It's the kind of thing like mommy's coming and she's arrived, or daddy. Flood your feeling self with loving and supportive phrases, and then offer comfort. Calm your feeling self with soothing words and gestures. So this is a little bit different because I read it and I thought, well, isn't this the same of what was said before? But it's a nuanced thing. So the remind may be, I'm here with you, and everything's going to be all right. Or I'm on the scene, I'm ready to help, I'm here to help, I'm by your side. So it's not just like, it's okay, honey, like, I understand. It's like, and I'm here for you. It's like,
right.
Like having that, and then it's love and care for you.
If you think of the title of that skill, Reinforce the Alliance, it's just a quick reinforcing. I'm here. You are not alone. Right? I just validated what you're feeling, but I want you to know that I'm here with you. Yes, it's acceptable to feel what you're feeling. It's understandable. That's a validation. Now I want to tell you, no matter what happens, no matter what you're doing, I'm here with you right now. I'm closer than your breath. And I'm going to flood you with love and support. I'm going to support you in every way I can. And the third part of that step is I'm going to comfort and soothe you. And the reason I put that step in there that it's very critical is that I want all emotional eaters, or anybody with problem behaviors who's reading this book, to begin to really figure out, what do you actually find to be comforting and soothing? That's going to be different for everyone. Is it comforting to tell yourself that everything's going to turn out okay? Or maybe that isn't comforting. Is it comforting to say that you have everything inside of you you need to get this done? What actually do you find? What words and phrases do you find comforting and soothing? Get those on paper. Write them down. Know what your inner nurture can say to you that you find comforting and soothing, right? Yeah. Also, are there any gestures when you're going through this that you find comforting and soothing? Is it comforting to touch yourself?
Your face, or like I see a lot of clients, they go like this, or stroking their arms.
Right, oxytocin flows. The body doesn't know whether someone else is touching you or you're touching yourself, right? Right. Oxytocin flows from self-touch. Right, so what do you find, what phrases and what gestures do you find comforting?
Right. I'm here for you, and I love you, and I know this is a difficult time for you, and I know things are going to get better. This too shall pass, whatever it is. Again, you have, again, these wonderful lists. And in some ways, what I like doing is, because I think these are all contextual. Like if I made a mistake, then everybody makes a mistake. No one is perfect. It's really good to see, right? It may not be relevant in all cases, but I see that these lists are contextual, and then just almost like having this near your snack drawer. So you're about to grab, the Doritos, and it's like, okay, let's see. Before I grab that, let's see if I can go through and do this. All right, so that's skill 3. And then skill 4 is getting clear on the needs. And what's interesting is you actually have 2 categories of needs. You have one which is your probably younger self, and then you have your adult self. What is that? Is this done by design in this particular way? Because there's a younger self and then an adult self version of the need that you have?
Well, actually, the reason I designed it that way is because I want you to understand that when you are ready to address your needs, so we went through the first 3 steps, and the next step is to get clear on your needs. Mm-hmm. And so your needs, if some of your needs, your emotional needs especially, went unmet when you were young, you may be a 55-year-old woman, but you notice that your needs are very young. So you're needing attention, right? Mm-hmm. You're needing mirroring, someone to mirror back what you're feeling, right? You may find, and oftentimes people will say to me, is it okay to have this need? Like, I need to be hugged. Like when I come home from a difficult day, I need a hug. Well, it's probably a younger phase of development, that need, but let's not judge it. Let's just identify what those needs are. Sometimes it's helpful to see, gosh, I think a lot of my needs, if we notice that a lot of our needs are kind of toddler age needs, that might have been where we got a little bit derailed in our development and our brain development. So it helps to be able to look and see, wow, a lot of the needs that I have not ever had met really go back to a long time ago. That's okay. As we attend to our needs, we will grow them up. Over time, our needs will become more age appropriate.
Right.
In the 3rd step, we begin to learn how to identify our needs, and we identify, when I want to go grab those cookies, because I'm not writing the article. What is the youngest part of me needing right now? What is the adult part of me needing? So you might say, the youngest part of me is needing reassurance that I can write it. Right. I need reassurance, and that's a bit of a younger stage of life. Right. The adult part of me is needing, to complete the task. The adult part of me is needing
commitment.
Commitment. Okay. Something like that. Right. So that's what the 4th skill is all about, getting clear on your needs.
Right. And then what do I do with that information? So here are my needs. So then I figure out, then I've done all the pre-work to figure out what I need to do. Like now I've kind of gone through the kind of emotional piece, hooked it up with my brain and the higher centers. And now I can go, okay, now I have all the data that I can now come up with a solution to solve these particular needs. Is that right? Like, is that why we go through these?
Yes, and if you come up with your needs, so you're going to the cookies because you've got this article to write and you haven't gotten yourself to write it, and then you realize that what you need is just some reassurance that, if you sit down that you'll be able to do this, and a little bit of commitment. Maybe you need a little confidence in yourself. And so you say a few lines to yourself and you're feeling ready to sit in the chair, then you're done for now. Then you don't really need to go through more of the steps, the next 3 steps, right? You've conquered your emotional eating. You moved away from the cookies. You got yourself to action, and you're done. And so I say to people, you don't always have to go through all 7 steps.
Okay.
But if you say, well, I know what I need reassurance, I need some confidence, but all of a sudden you start having all kinds of negative self-defeating thoughts about that, right? So you say, this is what I need, and now you hear in your head, yeah, but you're never a writer. You're not really a writer. You're not really a writer. And
what are you doing writing anyways? You're not a writer.
What are you doing writing? You're not going to be able to get this, good enough, So you start having all these negative thoughts. Okay, now comes in skill number 5. Right. Catch and reframe those self-defeating thoughts. Again, we're going to access the voice of our inner nurturer. And we're going to catch the voice of the inner critic. You're not a writer. You can't do this. And now the inner nurture is going to step in and give us a reframe. And we're also going to notice in this step, because throughout all of these skills, we notice the effect on our body. We notice, how do we feel when we practice optimism? How do we feel when we practice more energizing or calming or even neutral thoughts? So let's say we reframe some thoughts and we're feeling a little bit better about getting to it, but again, there's some self-doubt.
Yeah, and I can go to, oh, you know what, I actually am taking a writing class and I just got really good remarks from everyone. So even though there's a younger part of you that wonders about your writing skills, they're there to help you, and you're moving along and you're making progress.
Yes, and in a way, you just did, skill number 6.
Oh, what's skill number 6?
Skill number 6 is, after we've caught and reframed those negative self-defeating thoughts, you maybe started having some more doubts, like, yeah, but can I really do this? All right.
Right.
Skill number 6 is to highlight your strengths and your resources, right?
Okay.
So that's what you just did.
Right.
I've got this class and they've all, been behind me, and I've been doing very good, and I can write.
Committed to it. Yeah. Yes.
I've committed to it. And in skill number 6, I also have a section where we learn how to hold hope, because for many of us, hope is a fragile state. Maybe we're not feeling it all the time, or maybe we're not feeling it much of the time.
Right.
And we need to learn, how do we go about holding hope? What are the steps that we can take? So that's what that skill is about. And finally, in skill number 7, we're ready to meet our needs. We're really ready to meet the needs, solve the problem, right? Possibly learn to set limits. I teach you in that chapter how to set effective, gentle limits with yourself.
Yes, I love the dialogue in here. It's very funny.
That's the the limit setting conversation you're talking about.
Yeah, I want ice cream. I want ice cream at the end of the day. It's like, well, I understand that, and I love how the self nurturer goes, well, maybe just one scoop, and then it's like, what? And then that somehow comes in and says, no, maybe it's like, well, why don't you try some, if you can get some mixed berries and some yogurt and see how that goes, and then, we'll see where it goes from there. Or I don't know, but it was.
Well, the feeling self says, I don't want to. You know, it's like you go into the department store and the feeling self says, I want that new purse. Right. I like that purse. I want it. And
exactly.
And the inner limit setter, the inner nurturer morphs into a limit setter. It's her job to set limits. And she says, no, we said we were going to stay on a budget, so we're not buying it. It's outside of our budget. The feeling self says, no, but I want it. I'm never going to find it in this color again, and it will go with the shoes, and I'll never find it again. And sometimes you give in. Your inner indulger comes out, and you say, okay, we're getting a tax refund anyway. We can get the shoes. All right.
Right.
That's not good limit setting. Good limit setting looks like feeling self says, I want it. I want it now. And the inner nurturer says, oh, sweetie, I told you we don't have the budget for that, but I'm wondering, what are you feeling right now? What are you feeling? Because we don't need more purses, we don't need more cookies. We don't need more of this. I'm wondering what you're feeling. Well, I guess I'm not feeling very attractive lately, and I'm kind of feeling, dumpy and overweight, and I just feel like a new purse would make me feel better. Mm-hmm. And the inner nurturer says, well, I'm here to tell you that you're always beautiful. You're beautiful exactly the way you are, whether you have a little excess weight on you or you don't. You're always beautiful to me. And by the way, we're not going to buy the purse today.
Yeah.
So let's go find something else to do. And then the feeling self says, just like a good kid with a loving mommy, the feeling self says, okay. But as she heads out, she goes, but I'd still like the purse.
I had a very similar situation where I was talking to my coach, health coach, and she said, well, she gave me 10 different options for breakfast, because I was feeling imprisoned by having just eating this healthy meal all the time. And when I had that, I just felt like I had freedom all of a sudden, and the part of me that was protesting didn't have to protest anymore because I had 10 choices versus like 2 or 3. And the funny thing is I still ended up eating the thing that was convenient, but at least I just knew that I had 10 choices. So my feeling self was accommodated, even though I ended up doing the same thing I've been doing throughout the whole time. It was just the feeling self wanted freedom and control, and that little bit of having 10 choices versus 1 was enough. But this feeling self can really
Run the
it
show.
can really run the show if you don't have the limit setting, loving, nurturing adult saying,
And
yeah.
I have an expression where I say, never let the feeling self have the last word. Never let your inner critic have the last word. Always have the inner nurturer have the last word.
Oh, that's
Right?
beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Well, how marvelous. This is just such a wonderful book. We've been talking to Julie M. Simon about this book, When Food is Comfort. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure today.